Hello, and thank you all for joining us today for the presentation of the William L. Brown Award. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Wise Jackson. I'm president of the Missouri Botanical Garden, of which the William L. Brown Center is a part. I'm delighted to be able to join you virtually for the presentation of this prestigious award that recognizes the outstanding contributions of an individual in the field of genetic resource conservation and use. The award is made possible through a generous endowment from the Sehgal Family Foundation in cooperation with the family of Dr. William Brown. Dr. Brown was a distinguished, internationally recognized scientist, businessman, and humanitarian. And over the course of 5 decades, he devoted himself to the collection, preservation, understanding, and sharing of plant genetic resources in order to help meet the global demand for food. The William L. Brown Center carries on this legacy in its dedication to the study of useful plants, understanding the relationships between human beings, plants, and their environment, and the conservation of plant species, and the preservation of traditional knowledge for the benefit of future generations. The William L. Brown Award recognizes an individual whose efforts and achievements reflect a concern for those issues that were so important to Dr. Brown. The awardees over the last 2 decades have come from diverse institutions and fields. They include conservationists, plant explorers, crop breeders, ethnobotanists, and policymakers. They share an inspiring vision of a world in which plant genetic resources are understood and protected for the common good. And each exemplifies a history of impactful work in bringing this vision into existence. As the 9th recipient of the William L. Brown Award, Dr. Gary Paul Nabhan follows this eminent tradition. He is an agricultural ecologist, an ethnobotanist, and an author. His work has focused primarily on the interaction of biodiversity and cultural diversity in the arid, binational Southwest, a landscape that has been his home for the past 5 decades. However, his scholarship, leadership, and inspiration have had national and global impacts. He co-founded Native Seeds Search in 1983 to preserve plant-based Southwestern agricultural plants and the knowledge of their uses. He served as Director of Conservation, Research and Collections at both the Desert Botanical Garden and the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum. And Dr. Nabhan was the founding director of the Center for Sustainable Environments at Northern Arizona University. He now serves as the Kellogg Endowed Chair in Southwestern Borderlands Food and Water Security at the University of Arizona. Dr. Nabhan is considered a pioneer in the local food movement and the heirloom seed saving movement. His work has informed the conservation of the linked genetic and cultural heritage of his home region. His books include Gathering the Desert, Enduring Seeds, The Forgotten Pollinators, and Renewing America's Food Traditions, to name just a few, and they have inspired generations. Dr. Nabhan's past awards speak of the breadth of his impact and include the Calvin Sperling Award from the Crop Science Society of America, the John Burroughs Medal for Distinguished Natural History Writing, the Saveur magazine's Best 100 Food Initiatives, and a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship. In 2018, Dr. Nabhan was named Distinguished Economic Botanist by the Society for Economic Botany, 36 years after William L. Brown received the same award. It is certainly fitting that he is now being recognized with this award named in Dr. Brown's honor. please join me in congratulating Dr. Nabhan on this honorable achievement. Thank you.
Today, I have with me Emily Warshevsky, Gary Nabhan, who is a pioneer in ethnobotany, and we're going to be chatting with him a little about his work and what he sees for the future of the field.
And I'm so grateful to be here with you, so thank you.
Yes, it's great to have you here. So let's start out with a question about you and Bill Brown, who both spent decades working in this field of seed conservation. Did you guys ever interact? Did you know him or work with him at all?
We did. I didn't directly interact with him, but because he was involved in the first survey of North American mazes going tribe to tribe in about 1948, when I began to see what was left of Native American mazes in the U.S. and northern Mexico. I called him up and asked for guidance, and he continued to give me guidance when he retired from his executive positions. He really began to investigate deeply how some of the North Carolina corns came into the United States through a different route, and so we loved talking about that. And then I also had contact with Alice both before and after Bill died, and I admire and love her as much as I did Bill. So it's a great family and a great legacy that you have here at the garden, thanks to the Brown family.
That's really interesting. So what are some of the things that you're most excited about with your current research projects, your new directions?
Well, we briefly talked about this paper on arid land crops, many of which are wild relatives, that in ways was inspired by what Allison Miller here, well, many of your staff were involved with Allison in some of the database work, but she was looking at herbaceous perennials, largely in the legume family, and we thought, wow, we really need to do that for the desert regions of North America, do that kind of inventory, because within 30 to 50 years, well over 40% of the land surface of North America is going to be hitting hot, dry conditions. And we know we're facing water shortages. We know that Seattle this last week hit 110 degrees, and that water scarcity is in 12 states. We're in a 22-year-long drought with soil moisture levels the lowest that they've been in 120 years in baseline measurements. So how do we mobilize the great botanists and plant scientists at large to take on redesigning our agriculture for a hotter and drier world? And I think the model for that is a very interesting one. During World War II, there was an emergency rubber project to get an alternative source of rubber, primarily looking at Waiuli, a desert-adapted plant of the Chihuahuan Desert. And over 1,000 American scientists, from graduate level on to people who'd already won Nobel Prizes, were involved in that collaborative effort. That's what we need to really evaluate and adapt the 100-some genera of highly adapted arid plant foods to a redesigned agriculture for dry lands and hotter climates. About 80% of our conventional crops really can't flower and produce fruit when the temperature in their canopies is above 95 degrees. We're hitting 115, 120 degrees in Arizona regularly, and that's not the only place that's happening. So we need something like these green job corps of people taking this on, like the scientists and volunteers mobilized in the Federal Workers Project during the Dust Bowl, and with this emergency rubber project during World War II. 4 Nobel Prize winners in physiology and plant chemistry emerged out of that set of 1,000 scientists, and that's only one indicator of how much impact they had on science and on our economy in the following years. We need that kind of collaborative effort again to deal with the challenges of a hotter, drier world.
Mm-hmm. You have been working and thinking specifically about arid plants for over 40 years and thinking about the ecosystems and the ethnobiology. How did you first get interested in this particular area?
Well, that's a curious question that I've been thinking over the last couple days when I went back to where I was born in the Indiana Dunes. And I think it was a combination of being fascinated by what temperate plants could actually colonize moving dunes, and of course there are prickly pear there and a lot of other genera that are shared with desert areas. Of course they are fully temperate plants here. But I also grew up in a Lebanese American family. My grandparents and uncles were immigrants, and so they told me a lot of stories about the desert. So by age 17 I was going out to the deserts in the western United States and soon after that into Mexico. And I don't want to say it was a genetic predilection, kind of a biophilia impulse to work in deserts, but as soon as I got to the first deserts that I camped and backpacked in, I felt completely at home.
So can you tell me about one of your favorite plants from arid America, and how did you learn about it? How did you first encounter it?
Well, that's like choosing your favorite child. It's really hard to just focus on one plant, but I've been involved for more than 35 years with both technical and literary writing about wild chilies, because they reach their northernmost range in the county where I now live on the U.S.-Mexican border. And there was this very, very funny incident where I went to a small gift shop in our county called the Santa Cruz Chili and Spice, and they had chiltepines sold there, and I thought, wow, a wild crop relative being sold for the equivalent of about $15 a pound. Now it's like $75 a pound for these wild chilies. I need to learn more about that. So I went back to the herbarium and saw that literally within a mile of the shop was the northernmost population of wild chilies. So I started to hike the canyons there, and a former Border Patrol plant inspector saw me up there and said, "Oh, you're looking for the wild chilies? I'll show you a plant that I found 20 years ago that's still alive." And to this day, I visit that plant almost annually. It's over 50 years old, which is pretty old for a desert subshrub.
Tell me a little about the conservation work you've done on the wild chilies.
Well, one of the first in situ conservation reserves for any crop relative in the country. We can debate which was the first, because there were wild rice and wild strawberry protected areas in state parks. Was this wild chili reserve above that chili and spice shop on Coronado National Forest lands. And now we're using the term trans situ conservation for our work there, because we really want a seamless flow between ex situ studies of chilies that inform us about their morphological and biochemical adaptations to dry climates, and the in situ studies that can help us understand big questions like why chilies are hot, that have to do with their relationships not only to seed dispersers but to fungi and other microbiota that are seed predators during the brief wet time we have in the fall when the fruit are maturing. So we couldn't understand some of the ways that we could use wild chilies and things like integrated pest management until we studied them in situ.
You have, over your career, had a lot of experience with successful boots-on-the-ground conservation projects, it seems. What sort of lessons have you learned about how to pull that off successfully? A lot of scientists, are stuck in this ivory tower of academia, and they're interested in doing this, but it can be really difficult to have successful conservation programs. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, I guess I always misunderstood that metaphor of the ivory tower, and for some reason thought it was a poison ivy tower. So I never wanted to be stuck in a building much. I was blessed to work with some really good applied conservationists and ecological restorationists. And I said, well, why aren't we doing this kind of community-based conservation or restoration with indigenous peoples? Because their lands have been damaged by colonial era oppression and land grabs and environmental disruption. How can we help them restore the places that offered them so many of their medicinal plants and food plants? And so what I realized is that I was inadvertently learning to be patient because any cross-cultural work of any kind teaches you by brutal mistakes or by just the delight of working with other people who have different time frames and different priorities, how to be patient and how to listen. And so I think I still continue to work on mangrove and seagrass ecological restoration in Mexico and in agave and mesquite habitat restoration in Arizona, but it's all community-based, using volunteers, we started a program in our hometown called Earth Care Youth Corps, where 130 some local high school kids are paid to be involved 5 weeks a summer in ecological restoration on farms and ranches with the guidance of old farmers and ranchers, some of whom are their grandparents. And so that kind of restoration, rather than just a contract firm coming in, planning a bunch of things, then leaving, appeals to me because restoration is never done. And when you say you've had successes, you never feel like you've had a success with restoration because you know it has to outlive you to be a success. So I think I've just been blessed to have the tolerance of indigenous communities who wanted that goal and they were willing to put up with a fruitcake ethnobotanist who was interested in collaborating with them on that.
Gary, you are a prolific writer. I'm not sure how you find the time to do all of this writing.
I don't sleep.
But do you have a one piece, either an article or a book that's been your favorite to actually produce, to write, the whole process of it?
Again, it's like your children. You never really say, one's my favorite. And in ways, I have special affection for the first book I wrote, Desert Smells Like Rain. And most people say that was the best thing I ever wrote, and it's gone downhill since then. But they're half kidding me because I think I've added more technical depth to other books, which some people like because it is what they're after, and other people say, I want the stories. So that one is really, in ways, still my favorite too.
Yeah. Do you have one that you think is maybe underappreciated, that you wish more people had read or paid attention to when you first wrote it?
Yes, I published with Island Press a book that they called Why Some Like It Hot, that then was renamed in its second edition Foods, Gene, and Culture. And it's about the coevolutionary interactions between our diet as a selective pressure on our metabolism that affects our genetics, epigenetically or otherwise, and the cultural preparation of foods. So it's a very complex domain that I felt with more and more gene therapies that to some extent have validity, we still had to understand the context under which those genes evolved, especially when they're related to diseases. The irony for me is that book fell off the edge of the table in the United States, but has been a bestseller in Italy and Mexico, and Fondo de Cultura Económica did a beautiful Spanish edition that you can get in almost any bookstore of merit in Mexico, and I've never seen the English edition in a bookstore in the United States. So I think Italians and Mexicans intrinsically get that connection between their own genetic heritage, their diet, and their cultural preparation of foods in a much deeper way than melting pot America.
Yeah, that seems like it would make sense. Let's see. Have you seen a change in how humans relate to food during your career?
Well, some of the elements that now we celebrate widely were first sort of articulated by ethnobotanists who were great writers like Edgar Anderson. So I don't think we can give our generation credit for changing society's love for or appreciation for plants. But I have to say that the slow food movement that included relocalizing food systems and all of that involved dozens and dozens of ethnobotanists in helping chefs and food system activists decide what foods that were distinctive to their region or locality needed revival, and that in many cases the knowledge of ethnobotanists guided the community into bringing these back into the marketplace in our area, largely with Native American and Hispanic producers.
How has your lifelong work changed how you eat? Has it changed it? And how has it changed how you relate to other people and how they eat as well?
Well, I don't want to get teary-eyed, but it makes me so grateful to the people who bring us our daily bread, who are the lowest paid people in the United States. Farm workers and food service workers have the most difficulty keeping their own families fed. They're the people most likely to have to go to food banks. They suffer from the exposure of agrochemicals to a degree 100 times greater than those of us who eat conventionally grown foods. And they're most likely to suffer in the days of climate change from heat stroke, heat exhaustion, dehydration, and end up in urgent care or emergency rooms. So it's not so much that trying to relocalize my diet and connect directly with the producers, ranchers, farmers, and foragers, and fishers that produce my food, that it's about me having a perfect diet that can be put in health magazines. It makes me humbled by the fact that our society hasn't figured out a way to sustain our essential workers in our food system. And it's changed the direction of my research and my volunteer work to try to help them in any way I can.
What do you think is kind of one of the most surprising or unexpected developments that has happened during your career? What's something you didn't anticipate seeing?
Well, I had a conversation about this with a great integrative health proponent, Dr. Andrew Weil, who is one of Richard Schulte's ethnobotany students at Harvard. And we both said the same thing. None of us anticipated how much our health and the health of our soil is due to the microbiota, and that now probiotics, there's more than 40 beverages traditionally made in Mexico that are probiotic beverages that also help reduce blood sugar levels in diabetics. So in many ways, we're suffering from what Velasquez Manoff calls an epidemic of absence, that antibiotics have knocked out so many beneficial microbiota, not only in our guts, but in our agricultural soils, that we're suffering epidemics because of the lack of diversity, microbial diversity in our diets and in our agricultural environments. And Andrew Weil said, I could have never anticipated how important that is to our immune systems and the health of agroecosystems.
I want to end off with kind of a fun question. So you have done a lot of traveling throughout your career. Is there a story that sticks out in your mind as one of your favorite trips, or one of your maybe one of the experiences that had a really big impact on you?
Well, I worked on a book on spice trade for University of California Press that sort of overlapped with going to 6 of the Vavilov centers of crop diversity or crop origins, depending on how you see them. I think of them as crop origins because of wild crop relative diversity may be somewhere else. But on the way to travel every major historical spice trail in the world, I ended up in Oman because I couldn't get into Yemen. And I was hosted by a great crew of Omani scientists that have been trained in Russia and Europe and the United States that were fantastic hosts. And I'd said I'd really like to see some of the oldest spice markets here. The first one that we took me to, they said, we have a little surprise for you. And they took me to the Nabhan spice market where there was a distant cousin who is still selling frankincense and myrrh and many of the culinary spices from the Arabian Peninsula. So I realized I'm not just studying this is part of my own family heritage.
Wow. Well, Gary, I want to say thank you so much for being here and talking with me. I've learned a lot, and it's just been a real honor to have this opportunity. And at this time, I'm going to introduce Robbie Hart, who is the director of the William L. Brown Center, to present you with the William L. Brown Medal for this year in 2021.
Well, thank you, and it's an honor to be back at the garden again. This place has meant so much to me and to my wife over the years that it feels like a home away from home, and your staff is so brilliant and compassionate that I don't know what my life would be without my periodic visits here like Mecca.
Well, we look forward to having you back whenever you're in town.
Thank you.
So Gary, that was such a pleasure to listen to. You're as inspiring in conversation as you are in your scholarly work and your books. And it's my absolute honor to, on behalf of the William L. Brown Center and the Missouri Botanic Garden, present you with the 9th William L. Brown Award.
Well, again, I have such great respect for William Brown, Alice Brown, and the entire family legacy there that this is a deep honor, because getting an award in the name of people who are your heroes is doubly meaningful. So thank you, and thank everyone in the garden for considering me.
Wonderful.